Hi, welcome to 190 Page. I am Scott. We're doing the ranking of Stephen King short stories, all 115 published and completed stories. We are on stories 30 through 26. Let's go ahead and get started. Short story number 30 is an Everything's Eventual. It was originally published in Dark Love in 1995. It is Lunch at the Gotham Cafe. Basically, a guy is meeting with his soon to be ex wife and a lawyer, and there's a very strange waiter there who seems to be having a mental breakdown, and calamity happens after that, essentially. And it's just about what breaks people. Because not only is this waiter going through something causing him to harm others, but the main character in the story is also dealing with his crumbling marriage and his wife's animosity toward him, which this is written not in first person but essentially from his point of view, so we don't know necessarily what her thoughts are, what her point of view in the marriage is, but she seems very antagonistic towards him. And the story's kind of like, well, is it catching? Because at the end of the story, it seems like it could be catching. It's a very, very fun, but also kind of scary story in a psychological form. Short story number 29 was published in Nightmares and Dreamscapes after originally being published in the anthology Dark Visions. It is Sneakers. This quick synopsis is basically a ghost story in a studio bathroom. A guy basically sees sneakers under a stall all the time, and he starts to freak out about it and wondering what's going on. And he finds out what happened to the person who owned those sneakers. Uh, you could possibly say there's a little bit of perhaps corniness to this. There is a tale that might seem a little bit silly about what happened to this person, but the trip inside this man's mind, John, who sees these sneakers, and that's to me the whole crux of the story, the whole part which makes the story interesting to me. It's one of those times where you kind of think, well, is there really an ending to the story? Which you wouldn't be remiss to say not necessarily a satisfactory ending, but it's one of those times where Kings has that non-ending ending that I'm fine with. There's a resolution, but not necessarily the one we may have wanted. So, short story number 28 is In the Bizarre Bed Dreams. It is Under the Weather. It was originally published in the paperback version of Full Dark No Stars, which is his one of his novella collections. And it's really hard to talk about why this story is good without getting into the reason why it's good. So I will try to do as best as I can. But this guy, Brad, he has a nightmare. He gets up, kisses his wife goodbye, goes to work. He reflects on all his time with his wife. We get the feeling that there's something weird going on, but it's kind of like in a periphery kind of thing. And then he gets a phone call that he starts to panic about, but he's not really sure why. And then when we find out, it's both horrific and heartbreaking. And the way King slowly draws us into this. And I think some people who read this may see where it's going, not too far into it. I don't think you'll see necessarily right away, but when you see where it's going, it's like, I think even the thought is like, oh shit, I know it's going to happen. No, no, no. that shouldn't happen, but you see it coming and it does happen. It's just like it's one of those things that I think for some people will just hit harder. And that just has to do with how King has changed over the years. When he was first publishing, it was about monsters and the things that we don't see and children's fears basically, which kind of culminated it. And after that, what he wrote about went different. As he gets much older, it's about what we do see coming and that we can't stop. Number 27 is in Night Shift, originally published in Penthouse in 1977. It is Children of the Corn, which I think even non Stephen King people have heard of Children of the Corn just from the movies and some of the meme stuff. I think if your only experiences with the movies, you don't really get the sense of dread that you have in the short story. And I think it's probably one of King's first short stories where you kind of have that, which he has, I won't say he's replicated, but he's tried to duplicate in other stories, which is these strangers, usually a couple who aren't necessarily getting along as they might want to, go to a strange town, and the inhabitants of the town are off. In this case, it's kids and something else. And I would suggest if you've only seen the movie, read the story. To me, the story is much, much better and probably his best version of this type of story. Uh, the story that I think of when I say this, although there are multiple examples, I believe, but they got a hell of a band, which is not a good version of this type of story, but that's the one that immediately pops in the mind for me. The strangers in a town with strange residents, rainy season. There are multiple examples, but this is probably the best one. Number 26 in Skeleton Crew is Grandma. Originally published in Weird Book magazine in 1984. Never heard of that before. The kid is left home alone with his dying grandmother. Now, you don't, of course, expect her to die that night, but guess what? And Grandma doesn't want to leave. Now, if you watch one of my first couple of videos, there's another story, Willie the Weirdo, that bears a bit of a similarity to this. It's just not as good as this. It doesn't. Well, I just talked about how King used to write about children's fears, and this one incorporates that much more. Whereas, for example, Willie the Weirdo is about the fear of death, but also children's fascination with death. And I think whereas King generally writes about facing mortality nowadays in a very interesting way, I think this is one of the times where the children's fear of death, not to say that there's no fear of mortality in the story, but it's the focus on these two stories are different. In this type of story, I think it works a lot better in this form than it does in Willie the Weirdo, which really is not a good story. But Grandma is. So now we're finally down after this the top 25 short stories of Stephen King. So that's it for now. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment. I will talk to you next time.